Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my overview of Routine. Now, if you're not across it, I do overviews on this channel. I just have a look at the first 2 hours of a game because that's the Steam refund window. Steam believes you can make up your mind about whether you want to keep a game or not as a rule, and I would agree generally and say 20 hours in, you're probably not going to change your mind about how you felt 2 hours in. So we keep it short and punchy, broad strokes info. Keep it around 10 minutes, and then you can make up your mind on your own. Now, Routine, this game I have been hotly anticipating. I'm very impressed with. It's stuck the landing so far. I'm really psyched, and what I'm thinking about doing is actually doing like a follow-up video in a week. Like, I'll take my time with it and actually review it. Not to get too bogged down in this sort of back-of-house channel business. I like the idea of completing games and reviewing them, but as you've probably seen with a lot of major reviewers, you know, they burn themselves out by playing 70 hours non-stop and end up hating the game. Everyone wants to get the video out early, so sorry, a little bit of tidying house business. I'm likely going to review this, I'm that impressed by it, but that video won't be along for a while. For now, we'll just settle with my first impressions, which, you know, it'll be interesting to compare the two. The Routine has you as a software engineer, I suppose is what they technically call it, being called out to an after the fall scenario. We see this in a lot of video games. You know, BioShock is probably one of the biggest ones, where something's gone wrong and you're kind of almost crime scene investigating the aftermath of it. It's a great way to create these dioramas, this static storytelling without having to rely on, NPCs and animations and all that. And so you can follow breadcrumb trails, following notes and video footage and piece it all together. I don't need to teach you about this concept. Well, you probably haven't heard it in my terms before. You probably intuited it. It seems like a pretty easy avenue to set up a mystery thriller horror story, and that's what's going on here. And it's done really well. I don't want to spoil because there's already been some interesting reveals, but there is a hook. There's something that's going on, and it goes beyond what you've probably seen in the trailers, which is, you know, moving around this kind of first-person horror environment, and you're kind of getting chased by these robots, right? They're only part of the puzzle. You could almost call it a reaction to what's really going on. So, you know, that's as much as I want to give away, but the carrot on the stick, the curiosity, has really got me, right? I'm the fish on a hook. I'm invested. I really want to understand the sci-fi mystery hook, and it's probably worth impressing that this is more than, like, I suppose if you were soft triaging this by a trailer, you might go, this is just one of those scary games that's trying to terrify you and all that. That's not at all what's going on. In fact, the horror component, I think, is quite light. An example, one of the revelations is these Type 5 droids, which are, you know, they're kind of like working Joes from Alien Isolation. In fact, there's a lot of comparisons that we can make there, and you can see that looking at the game. But it seems apparent with whatever's going on with the security systems, with the computer systems, of which you've been brought on to triage as a software engineer, these robots can only really stay active one at a time. And they have certain behaviors, certain patrol routes, even the way that they chase you, and they have this like scanning laser that comes out, and it's straight out of Alien art aesthetic, and I'm talking Alien 1. Much like Alien Isolation, this is what I would call personally 70s futurism. This cleaner, you know, lots of whites, demarking areas and interests with a fairly, I wouldn't say vibrant, but a wide color palette, but muted, not quite pastel. Again, something straight out of like the Nostromo from Alien 1 or all of Alien Isolation. And to compare that, what I would say is like, consider the Aliens, James Cameron, the sequel. That's more of that industrial black steam jets, 80s futurism. And you see that in a lot of Cameron's sci-fi. So that's not what's really going on here. And it's done really well. In fact, I would argue, and this might be sacrilegious, it kind of does it better than Alien Isolation in a almost one-upsmanship trying to prove itself. This station on the moon that you're on has a lot of like VHS players. They've gone with the more high fidelity interface of pressing buttons. Great example is the little tool that you have, right? Think Isaac Clarke from Dead Space, but instead of mechanical, we're on the software side. You have this kind of scanner thing, and it doubles as a defensive weapon. So if there is a robot chasing you down, you can zap it, and all that will really do is make it stagger. You can't kill them at all, so they've got that Nemesis Resident Evil component to them, but they are fairly clunky and dumb, and you can kind of outrun them, and There's a lot of like closing doors, trying to break line of sight. So it is fleeing from an invulnerable enemy. Again, Alien Isolation. The inspirations are clear, but it is doing enough of its own thing to make it not like a rip-off. And that thing only gets 3 shots before it's out of battery, so you have to be very sparing. It has that survival horror limited ammo component. But that thing is as much your lifeline tool as it is an actual weapon. Arguably, you'll never really use it as a weapon, especially once you figure out how the robots work. You know, sometimes they're just going to grab you, and you kind of get a gimme. They'll grab you and throw you, and then you can move, and I'm not really sure. I think if you let them grab you a second time too quickly, that's it, you're dead. But I haven't really pushed it and tested it more than once. But this tool, you know, you can press R and pull it up and look at the side of it and press different buttons. And so far I've got like an extra mod kit that I can use on it, which has a torch component, so you can use it and hold it up in the middle of your screen and kind of look into the background to see the torch in the dark where, you know, the actual tool is in your face in the front, in the foreground. It's a very clever way of sort of squinting into the distance while you go down dark tunnels, but you can also use it to like find ultraviolet writing or fingerprints for codes, things like that. You can degauss the weapon, which is quite novel because there are moments where you'll get into like magnetic interference and it will warp the readings on the screen until you degauss it. So that's kind of clever. But the thing that you'll probably use the most is remote control or remote connection to terminals, and that's mostly the save system way that this works. There'll be these projector screen terminals on walls, and you press the button on the side of it to connect. And through that, there'll be a menu that you can navigate. It is very Fidelity, right? I like games where you press the buttons with the mouse button in the game, right? You have this more interactive component. And from there, you know, it will list off your tasks and objectives, any media files you've collected, but there'll be a save icon at the bottom of it as well. So at the moment, yeah, I'm just cruising around trying to solve problems. There are a lot of, like, I don't want to give them away, but it is fiendishly grounded in how clever the puzzle solutions are. I know I'm talking in vagaries, but it's kind of necessary. But there are little things like you can lie down on the floor and look under cracks underneath tables and things like that, or peek up over the top. Here you go, I'll give you this, that you can sort of debug consoles, right? So some consoles, they will have a tiny little button on the screen, and you can use that to use your wireless gun thing to connect to them, much like you would to one of these save panels that you are more normal to interface with. And through that, you can run the debug, and it will give you a bunch of little codes, and you can check them against the debug table and figure out what it is. And, you know, one of the early solutions is that you need to power cycle the box in question. And it's literally, you know, tech support 101. Find the power button on the physical console, flick it off, flick it back on, it'll reboot, the diagnostic will run properly, and now you can open a door. Other times where you might actually fire your gun to short out a power box. And again, there are some other solutions which I don't really want to give away. Anyway, I think I've given the framing. This game is excellent. I'm really, really impressed. As someone who is not allergic to horror games, don't get me wrong, I like survival horror. And the example that I often use is things like Resident Evil, probably my favorite series of all time. But to call a Resident Evil game scary would actually not do them justice. They're not scary. A lot of them are actually quite B-grade cheesy action schlock, closer to something like a Dawn of the Dead zombie movie. It's not interested in scaring you. It just happens to be in a horror trapping. I mean, 7's a little bit of an exception, but, you know, if you compare it against something like a Silent Hill game where they do actually try and terrify you, or a lot of the indie shovelware shit that they get these days, where it's just about jump scares and fear. No, this sits closer to what I get from like a Resident Evil. There is a horror component. It is scary because you're isolated on your own, but the mystery, the back and forth, the soft Metroidvania of trying to get access to areas from moving around and solving the environment, but having to navigate the antagonistic component, all against an interesting thriller hook. This does it expertly. So that would be my main bit of advice. If you're someone like that you enjoy those parts of the Resident Evil series, which makes it like my favorite series, then this is a no-brainer. You should get this. If you look at this and you're kind of scared off, you're like, I don't really want to play a game that's trying to scare me, rethink that, because that's not what's going on. This is so incredibly solid, and at this point I'm just curious how long it goes for. I guess we'll find out. I plan on doing a follow-up video, but let's see how we go. Anyway, team, let's wrap it up there. Might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.